look at it? Would you just look at it? It's beautiful. This week, Aston Martin has graciously loaned me a 2019 DB11 coupe in Stratus white with these dark gray wheels. Really beautiful color combination. Not the flashiest color combination that Aston Martin offers, but subtle enough to just look really, really elegant and still turn a lot of heads. And I promise you that having been driving in this car all week, I have been turning a lot of heads in this car. This is the V8 model, which is actually the better one if you ask journalists like me, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about why, talk about how this car drives, what it's like to live with, and then I'm going to deliver my final recommendation at the end. I've got the window sticker to the DB11 here, and oh boy is it fun to look at. As you'd expect on a car like this, the DB11 ain't a cheap date by any stretch. The starting price is just a tad over $201,000, although with the options that we have here, the total as tested price is just over $234,000, which is not a huge price delta from the base to the as tested price. When you talk about Aston Martins, Ferraris, Lamborghinis, some of the options can cost $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 extra. This is actually a pretty low option car when you come to think about it. We do have some black body packs, that's $2,000. We have some contrast stitching for $570. One of the big things is on the inside we have a technology package, that's about $3,800. So we do have a few options like that, but overall there aren't many ridiculously priced options to help bring the price of this car up. And if I look over here at the major sources of foreign parts content, we've got 66% of parts from the UK. Not surprising, this car is British after all, and it's hand-built in England. But then you look and see 22% parts content from Germany. And if you want to know where that 22% came from, all you have to do is open up this big clamshell hood and take a look at the 4-liter twin turbocharged V8 engine. It's good for 503 horsepower, 498 foot-pounds of torque. Same motor you'll find in cars like the C63, the AMG GT, even the new E-Class E63, although Aston Martin, unlike Mercedes, which uses a 9-speed or a dual-clutch transmission, Aston Martin has this mated to a ZF 8-speed automatic. So I actually think it's a little bit smoother than it is in the Mercedes application. And Aston Martin has changed some things on this engine, so it doesn't sound quite the same as the Aston Martin. It's a little less poppy, it's a little less shouty, it's a little more refined. I really like it. You can also get a 5.2 liter twin turbo V12 on this car. That's going to start at about $216,000, and that's going to get you 600 horsepower and 516 foot-pounds of torque. So you're getting around a 20% power bump for about 9% more money, but you are going to get about 250 pounds added to the front axle of this car. So if you want the Aston Martin DB11 that handles better, this V8 one is the one you're going to want to buy. And now for the fun part. This car is a 4-seater, although I'd really call it a 2+2. Aston Martin does include a back seat, so I'm going to show you what it's like to fit back there. Apparently, one of my other journalist friends told me that you can fit a baby seat back there, so if you do have a family, you can put a baby back there. It's really meant for children, but I'm going to show you what a grown adult looks like back there. It ain't fun, but I'm going to try it anyway, just for your viewing pleasure. You just pull this leather strap, and the seat actually whirs forward all the way up, so it's super easy to get in. Getting in is the easy part. It's once you're back there is when it's not that comfortable. I suggest going 1 foot at a time, simply putting 1 foot in, and then kind of crouching down into it. All right, now I'm back here. The problem is that the butt area where you put your butt ain't that big, so you do feel kind of squished. And then if you just lean the seat back, it'll whir back until it feels you bump. So don't worry, it won't crush your knees. It'll sense that and it'll move an inch forward. You're really only good putting children back here or adults for a very, very short period of time. But hey, it's got a back seat. Maybe you'll use it. Okay, so if you haven't been in an Aston Martin recently, there is a lot of difference here. Aston Martin has partnered with Mercedes to provide all of the electronics so they actually work properly now, instead of those old Aston Martin nav systems that were pretty much impossible to use. So I'm going to guide you through a little bit of what you can expect on this Aston Martin head unit. It's the Mercedes command unit, so you can control it using this little rotating dial here. It also clicks in different directions, and you also have this little touchpad that you can use to swipe through different menus. You have these sort of home buttons here, so that's going to take us to our nav. You can have it take you to your telephone options. It'll read texts aloud to you and things like that. It's an okay system to use. I really haven't been blown away by the usefulness of it, but I think coming from where Aston Martin has been, it's a huge upgrade and a huge step up, so I really can't complain too much about it. You see in a lot of these cars, they tend to have infotainment systems that are maybe half a generation to a full generation old. Lamborghini, the Aventador, still uses an old Audi system. Ferrari, for a long time, used an old Chrysler system. So as far as taking from the best, I think Aston Martin has done a smart job taking from Mercedes. And overall, this interior layout is pretty good. I don't like these touch-sensitive buttons. You use this little volume rocker to change the volume on the radio. I would much rather just have a volume knob. The new Vantage is going to have physical buttons instead of these touch buttons, so as far as the interior layout, I think the Vantage looks pretty cool. There is this nice little slot here that looks like it's big enough for a phone, although I put mine on it and it always falls forward, so it's almost perfect for a phone, but not quite. There are some nice features here. If I push the camera button, it gives me a 360 degree layout around the car, which is really good. You don't want to scrape this beautiful, lovely car. And the rest of the interior is pretty nice. The only cheap part that I want to say are these air vents. Mercedes uses beautiful metal vents. I tested the S63. You can check out that review on our channel. Had those beautiful metal pearl vents, and these are just plastic, so that's the one area that I feel is a little bit cheap on this car. The rest of it, beautiful. The headliner is leather. The seats are really nice leather. This center armrest, which slides back electronically, is leather. I really like the layout. The cup holders are right here with this little metal crossbar to keep your drink from falling. Works really well, and since there's no transmission here that you need to move, really easy to just put your cups there and watch it slide forward. The transmission is controlled here. You've got your engine start, which lights up red when you have your key in and you put your foot on the brake. And PRND, these buttons are glass. You can feel that because they get cold and hot. They aren't plastic. These are actual glass buttons. I don't love having the buttons. You kind of have to look as you're going to shift every time, but it's fine. It's not a big deal. I kind of preferred Mercedes, how they had the stock mounted shifter, but other than that, this is a really, really nice layout. It's a little bit tight. If you want more of an airy experience, I would go for the convertible. You're going to feel a lot more airy in this interior, but otherwise, it's a very lovely place to sit, and everything you touch is leather. It's lovely. Alright, so now we're going to talk through what the driver gets to see here. Very, very nice controls here. I'm going to go ahead and start it up so you can see what it looks like visually. Now, Aston Martin used to do these beautiful metal analog gauges, and they've switched to this digital layout. And it's funny because if you've watched any of my reviews recently of BMWs and other cars like that, I've been really critical of analog gauges because I love these digital displays because they can display such good information, and usually they look really, really pretty. Not that this doesn't, but I think Aston Martin may have made a small mistake here. I think that the old gauges were some of the prettiest in the entire automotive industry, and these are just average. They're not great. There's a lot of black dead space on the side here. You have your gas, and you have different trip information here. You can have it show your navigation, your radio, media. This is actually how you go and turn the traction control off, which I think is a little silly. You have to go into settings, assistant, then ESP, and then here you go. There's your traction control. I'd rather it just be a button. And all of these buttons on the steering wheel are actually kind of difficult to use. They're really easy to push. Like, I'm going to push the back button now, but I've noticed that sometimes they just don't register. Like, okay, I'm going to click on factory settings. Click. Click. You really have to push it and hold for it to take notice of it. I'm not sure why it's like that. Maybe they just don't want you to accidentally push something. It's a little bit weird. I'm not sure why they went for that, but the controls are easy to reach. Up here you have your mode changer. I'm gonna go ahead and put it in sport mode. And you'll notice that the tachometer changes a little bit, and you can maybe hear the exhaust open up. This is going to change the personality of the car completely. And then you've got your Sport Plus mode. Now you see, oh, the gauges go red, the gauges over here change, and that's going to be your most aggressive setting. And then over here you have your suspension button, which can be catered individually of the drive mode. So if you want to drive sporty but you want to have the most comfortable suspension, you can do that. But if you go ahead and push this button, you can cycle through GT mode, Sport mode, and Sport Plus mode, just like you can with the normal driving modes. And then we have these beautiful paddles here. They're metal. One of the big things they changed on the V8 model versus the V12 model is apparently journalists were complaining that the throws of these paddle shifters were too long. You really had to pull it really far. So this is about 50% shorter. I really, really love how they feel. They're metal, so I've been brushing my hands against it, and you can hear that little metal clinking noise. I don't know if the camera will pick it up, but oh, they are just beautiful. They're this really nice matte coated material. The steering wheel is, of course, beautiful leather. It's actually a bit square, which some people have complained about while you're going to rotate, that it's a square wheel. I have had zero problems with it. I think it's actually a great wheel. I think the paddle shifters are great, and although the gauges are not the prettiest, they're not as pretty as Aston Martin used to be, they're functional and they work very, very well. Alright, so part of what you're paying for on this Aston Martin is the beautiful aerodynamics of this car. This car will do 187 miles an hour, which is pretty fast. It's a very slippery body. You really can't tell the difference between this and the V12 other than a V12 badge on the fender, and you get 4 vents instead of 2 vents on the hood. But if you get the coupe, no matter what, you're going to have this awesome aero channel. The wind just kind of comes in here and you're like, oh, well, where does it go? Well, let's come around back and you'll find out. So there's no fixed spoiler here. You can see this big hole here. The wind from that channel actually comes out through here. There is a pop-up spoiler that deploys at a certain speed, although having driven the car, I really haven't gotten to see that in action. And I think it's really, really cool. If you open up the trunk, you can see these little tunnels here. And if you zoom through, we have some footage of, you can just see all the way through to where the air comes out, and it comes out through that, they call it a virtual spoiler, so it provides downforce on the back. This car is just really, really stable at high speeds no matter what. And the trunk back here is pretty darn good. I went into my garage and I pulled out my biggest suitcase and put it right in there. It fit no problem. I couldn't fit a second suitcase, but trust me, this suitcase is quite large. So if you're taking a trip for the week, you'll be fine. Or if you're taking a couple's trip for the weekend, you will also be fine. So now all that's left to do is the most important thing, which is take this car for a drive and tell you how it feels. Alright, so now I'm behind the wheel. The most important reason why you're going to buy one of these over a Mercedes or an Audi or relatively expensive cars, but not extremely expensive cars, is the way it drives. And with the 4-liter V8, you're going to do 0 to 60 in about 4 seconds. That's only a tad off of that V12 one. Even though it's got about an extra 100 horsepower, the V12 only does it in 3.9 seconds. So you're really not losing all that much. And that's because this weighs about 250 pounds less than that V12 one. So I'm going to go ahead and put that into practice. I have it in sport mode. I have the traction control set to its track setting, which is going to allow a little bit more slip of the wheel, and I have it in full manual mode, and we're going to enjoy this launch. Little bit of slip. Really, really nice. No drama. Super easy. The paddles, I love pulling them. You can get some immediate gear shifts out of this car. It's really, really good. The downshifts, you get that crackle, that pop. It's not as crazy as what you'll get in the Mercedes cars. Mercedes has theirs tuned a little bit more to be rah, 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 shouty, German, crazy, whereas the Brits wanted to create their own unique sound, a little bit more of a refined sound. And when you go ahead and drop it back in its GT mode, it's quiet, it's burbly, you hear it in the background, but if you really want it to be loud, you go ahead and stick it in that Sport Plus mode and you're really, really gonna feel it. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull out again and you're gonna hear that wonderful sound. The shifts are ferocious when you put it in Sport Plus mode. You really feel them. I'm going to downshift now. Oh, you hear those pops. You really get on it. Interestingly enough, there is some turbo lag here. I'm going to go ahead and shut it up so it's nice and quiet. I'm going to go ahead and drop it back into auto mode, and then it just becomes a nice, quiet daily cruiser. It shifts automatically. It's as easy to drive as a Prius. You have no problems driving this car around every single day in its GT mode. Interestingly enough, if I go and put my foot on the throttle now, I don't get the best response out of it. It goes and it seeks the highest gear like most automatic transmissions, although it's tuned really, really well to shift down manually if you do put it in those modes. But yeah, driving it around in normal mode, super quiet. You don't really hear it too much. You do have a sport mode in between that and those suspension settings. The ride is pretty darn good. It's not luxury car comfortable. It is slightly stiff. You can maybe see it in the camera. It does bump around just a little bit. Not what I would call punishing. Definitely something I could live with every day as a daily driver. But if you're old enough to afford this car, it might be a little bit stiff for you. I would say in the pantheon of these types of cars, the Bentley Continental is more of the luxury, comfortable car that happens to be a fast missile, whereas this is a little bit more catered to the sport. I can change these suspension settings to put it in its bumpier mode. You do feel it a little bit. It's not super drastic. You'll notice it more is if you take this on a racetrack or something like that, you'll feel it remain a little bit more flat, but I've mostly just left it in the comfort suspension mode. There's a little bit of road noise that you can sense. We do have big 20-inch rims on this car. They're 295s in the rear. I believe they're 255s in the front, and you get to hear some road noise off of them. It's probably coming through in the camera. It's decently quiet in here, but it ain't no bank vault either. I drove the Mercedes S63 recently, and that was a lot quieter, even though it was a convertible. Aston Martin does give you the double paned glass, which is meant to insulate you a little bit more and get rid of some of that road noise, but it hasn't worked flawlessly. You do feel like you're in sort of a loud car, although not intolerable. With the radio on, you almost don't even notice it. It's pretty darn comfortable. So this is a really nice daily driving car. I would have no problems driving this car around every day, even with the little bit of turbo lag at the low end. Once you feel those turbos come on in the mid-range, all the power is there, and it is so fast. This thing is a missile once those turbos rev up. The one thing that I'm a little disappointed with is that it's only 503 horsepower. I know it's kind of hard to complain about 503 horsepower, but in 2018, there are cars that make a lot more power than that. If you are one of those people that is just horsepower obsessed, the V12 produces 600. You can also get the new AMR DB11 V12, that's 630, and they have this rad new DBS Superleggera. I'm hopefully going to get to drive that sometime soon. That produces a massive 715 horsepower. So if you're just horsepower crazy, you can go for one of those, but trust me, this 503 horsepower is absolutely fine. Aston Martin says you'll get about 20 miles per gallon in this, which is better than the V12. I'm going to go ahead and check what I've gotten now. From start, I've gotten 6.5. I've averaged about 16. Not great, but this car doesn't get charged a gas guzzler tax or anything crazy like that. So this V8, I think the reason why they did it at first was for fuel economy, and maybe for those markets where you get taxed for those bigger engines. 4-liter is a much lower tax than that 5.2-liter V12 that they do. But I think that they've stumbled upon brilliance here. This AMG motor may be my favorite motor on sale today. I said that when I reviewed the S63. I don't think there is a better sounding V8 that you can get in a normal everyday car than that AMG motor, and I'm so happy that Aston Martin picked the right engine to use in this car. And they've changed a few things to make it sound a little different. They've changed the steering and suspension. They brought on a new engineer who wasn't there during the initial development of the V12 model, but he was there to fix some of the criticisms people had with it for this V8 one. And overall, Aston Martin has created a masterpiece here. Of course, it goes without saying that I'm going to be giving the DB11 V8 my highest rating of must buy. If you have the means, you should definitely consider one of these. There are other cars in this competitive price bracket that are more comfortable if that's all you want. If you want something really fast that's going to be the most comfortable thing to drive, the S-Class, the Bentley might be more for you. But if you're not ready to step into a Vantage or a Huracan or an R8 into that level, this provides one of the best middle grounds in the business. And if you've liked this review and you'd like to see more, subscribe to the Car Buzz YouTube channel and be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram and download our app on iOS and Android to keep up with the latest and greatest in automotive news. Hope you've enjoyed the video. See you next time.